Thanks very much for that very kind introduction. My name's Matt Thomas. I'm from Blank Rome. I'm up from Washington today. A lot of you have worked with my colleagues in disputes and ship finance here in New York, but down in Washington, our maritime team looks a little different. We have a team of regulatory lawyers, lobbyists, and ship finance folks. And we're really in the business of trying to identify and analyze and manage some of these significant sort of political and regulatory risks that we've been hearing about today. I mean, Martin talked about the effect and the duration of the tariffs and the trade war, and Rasmus from Traffic Euro talked about the impact and uncertainty of the Iran sanctions and how things are going to play out with Iran crude. And these are the kinds of things that we're trying to get after in Washington to help the shipping community understand some of these issues and hopefully try and manage them. Starting off with the tariffs, because that's really been a big focus of ours this year. Tariffs went into effect. The steel and aluminum tariffs went into effect in March. With the 25% tariff on steel and 10% on aluminum imports. There were temporary exemptions for our largest metals trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and the European Union, but those expired on June 1st. There are permanent exemptions added for Brazil and South Korea, and both steel and aluminum for Argentina and Australia. All these exemptions, except for Australia, came with strict quota requirements. Now, you've probably heard in the news in the recent days the successor to NAFTA, the USMCA, has been agreed to. The steel import issue hasn't been resolved, however, in the context of those talks. Talks are continuing and ongoing, and the signs suggest that the tariffs eventually will be replaced with a quota system. With Canada, sort of normalizing this kind of Section 232 fight over metals and national security, but that really still remains to be worked out on the Canadian side. Some of our biggest concerns. Maybe this is just a profoundly Washington thing, but some of our biggest concerns have been procedural, and procedural things go to predictability and certainty, the things that impact the market. So Commerce established a waiver process by which companies can ask for waivers from these tariffs based on economic harm and hardship. And really the key driver to that is whether the metals products are available in the United States or from US suppliers or not. Now, they were swamped, receiving over 38,000 exclusion requests and 17,000 objections to those requests. Only a small fraction of those have been processed thus far. So you have just from regulatory lag this uncertainty how projects, including major infrastructure projects, are going to be treated under these tariffs. And it has knock-on effects. I mean, this will have direct effects on shipping-linked industries. I mean, the most obvious is increasing the cost of U.S. new builds in our shipyards. But the sort of ripple in the pond effects are just as significant. We in a recent survey by the Dallas Fed talking to oil and gas executives, over 2/3 of those executives say the steel and aluminum tariffs are having an impact right now on their business, and pointed especially to the impact on oil and gas exploration and production, and also to pipeline infrastructure. And there was some discussion there about the tariffs having a sort of a delay effect on the ability to add new shale production and the ability to add new pipeline capacity out of the Permian and other places to get those cargoes to the export markets. So you will have these basically sort of knock-on effects that will impact shipping and will impact crude export markets, but aren't directly linked to the tariffs. The other big part of the tariff picture are the China tariffs. Under Section 301, which goes to unfair trade practices, the White House first imposed a tranche of 25% tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese imports in July. Then a second tranche of on $16 billion of goods in August. And then the great big one, third tranche of tariffs covering $200 billion in goods, was finalized in September. Those started at a 10% level, but we're looking at those to step up in January to that 25% level of the other ones. The president also recently threatened further tariffs on the remaining $267 billion of Chinese goods imported into the US. Here again, the sort of procedural, the waiver issues come into play. Importers who are subject to phase 1 and phase 2, sorry. Phase 2 can file exclusion requests saying we're being harmed by this. But for now, people in the White House are telling folks on the Hill there's not going to be an exclusion request at all for the big phase 3 tariffs. And what we're seeing in our office is American companies and American workers being harmed across the board in various industries. Because these really are taxes on US industrial inputs or taxes on retail goods coming in from China across a broad range of sectors. So they're really, for a lot of these, is not an escape hatch for US companies to seek relief. Some of the impacts here, broad range of products impacted, especially machinery, apparel, furniture, vehicles, toys. We've seen over 10,000 filings from impacted companies and persons in USTR dockets looking for companies or products to be excluded. In one little bit of good news for the maritime sector, port cranes were at the last minute taken off the list. So those tariffs were imperiling some major infrastructure improvement projects in Virginia and elsewhere. But still, cargo handling equipment and other port infrastructure items remain on the list. The indirect impacts of these China tariffs are equally interesting, though. It's having a significant impact on offshore energy, both offshore oil and gas exploration and production, and on wind projects, on renewables. But the bulk of the impact of the tariffs really is on the liner sector. And we seem to have seen a little bit of a boost in the liner trades during the peak season, pre-September, as companies were hustling to get containerized goods into the US. Now that we're past October 1st, now that we're in the sort of post-peak season period, naturally you'll see a fall off. But analysts like Alpha Liner are suggesting the fall off and the blanked shippings in the liner sector will be far more significant this year, suggesting we may see as much as 750,000 TEU of idled capacity in the month ahead. China's retaliation, however, has had, as we heard from Martin, a big impact on the dry bulk sector, with most of their retaliation focused on agricultural commodities, chemicals, also LNG. And probably the biggest startling impact of this has been the rapid devaluation of the Chinese currency, which has fallen almost 10% since its level six months ago. This has had the effect of offsetting some of the bite of the US sanctions as cost of Chinese goods have fallen, but obviously it further adversely impacts US exports, which already are subject to retaliation. And even though oil exports are not subject to the tariffs or to any retaliation, we have seen a startling and precipitous drop-off of Chinese imports of US crude. A year ago, and really from when US crude exports began, Canada and China were leading markets for US crude. In the last month, we've seen those numbers drop almost to zero. And this is really a matter of the currency shift, risk management, uncertainty over further retaliation, so that trades of US crude into China have really fallen straight off. The outlook for a quick resolution, we think, is not great. There's, I think, a perception in the administration that China's not on the ropes, but China is definitely feeling the pinch. China's government is, and China's economy is struggling with the tariffs, but also more systematic issues having to do with leverage and lending. China's eased its bank reserves in the last few days, trying to create a little bit of stimulus and boost lending for investment. But there is a perception, I think, in the administration that they're taking a go-slow effort on re-engaging with China on trade talks, and there'll probably be a little bit more pain, both on the Chinese side and for impacted U.S. companies for the foreseeable future. So, turning quickly then, sorry about that. And there we go. Turning quickly to the reimposition of Iran sanctions. As Rasmus Nielsen from Traffic Euro said, the Iran situation is a big cloud of uncertainty that hangs over the market. Will barrels continue to be lifted out of Iran? Certainly, we saw strategies last time to continue to move barrels from Iran, particularly to Asia, and it's likely that some of these strategies will be put in place again. Obviously, companies are very concerned about secondary sanctions, the ability of the U.S. to take retaliatory action against companies in shipping or trading that are non-U.S. companies that do business in Iran. But as players in the market look at ways to sort of firewall off their operations from potential U.S. operations, and as China looks at the Iran situation strategically, in connection with the U.S. tariffs and everything that's going on with their U.S. crude exports, we may see more barrels start to be lifted out of Iran. But something that we'll continue to look at very closely, what the market's doing and how Washington is expected to respond. For us in sort of our day-to-day sanctions practice, really with Iran, the biggest sort of sticking point or the biggest thing folks are tripping over is with any Iran-related trade, it needs to really be walled off from US dollar transactions and US banks. And so that means payment of freight, but also charter hire and brokerage and bunkers. Anything having to do with Iran really needs to stay out of US banks. Just in the last few weeks, we saw $5 million in penalties against JP Morgan Chase for processing airline payments related to sanctions targets. As some of you have I'm sure, seen, banks are hypersensitized when it comes to Iran linkages for any payments in transactional banking. And this JP Morgan thing is just going to sort of add fuel to that compliance and screening problem. And this is really the biggest sanctions risk out there. The biggest sanctions risk isn't being hit by charges from OFAC or DOJ. The biggest sanctions risk for companies in the shipping sector is getting blacklisted from major US banks, so you can't timely process payments. So. Just quickly, other key sanctions issues that really have been hot this year have been the escalation of Russia sanctions, the oligarch sanctions that impacted some major commodity companies like metals trader and producer Rusal, and the ongoing sanctions on Russia's offshore energy and deep water drilling. And the sanction situation with Venezuela also created a lot of uncertainty, including their introduction of this petro cryptocurrency and their efforts to try to force the maritime industry into using that. Just the two other kind of hot topics, international trade-wise, that we've seen this year have been the modernization of CFIUS, that's the national security-based restrictions on inbound investment into the US. we certainly have seen CFIUS bite in the context of foreign investment in U.S. ports, and we expect really the restrictions on foreign investment in U.S. maritime industries or facilities to continue. And I talked already a little bit about the upgrade to NAFTA. Not big impacts for shipping, but really that could be a template for how to proceed on resolving the trade war with China. Thank you very much. I'm out of time, but delighted to talk to anybody if you have any questions. Thanks very much.